My name is Naomi Carter. I am 27 years old, and the night my mother laughed in my face, I finally understood something I had been too hopeful to accept for most of my life. That no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I sacrificed, I would never truly be a daughter in her eyes. It happened at my parents' dining table. My twin sister Sienna was engaged, and the whole family had been spinning in circles over her wedding for weeks. That evening, my mother had spread binders and swatches and seating charts across the table like she was running a political campaign. They talked about imported flowers, a private garden venue, a designer gown, and a honeymoon that made no sense for a family that had always preached practicality to me. I let them talk. I sat quietly, the way I always had, and I waited. Then I asked a simple question, a question that should have had a simple answer. I asked what that level of spending meant for the rest of the wedding fund, the one my grandparents had started for both of us when we were teenagers, the one meant to be equal, the one my grandmother had pressed into my hand with a promise that no matter what happened later, this would be one thing no one could take from me. The room went silent in a way that told me everything before anyone spoke. My mother set down her fork. She gave me the look I had seen my whole life, the one she wore right before she punished me for disrupting her preferred version of reality. Then she told me, casually, as if commenting on the weather, that there was no my share anymore. Most of it had gone into Sienna's wedding. When I asked about the money I had personally contributed, money I had earned working part-time as a teenager because I believed in that fund, because I believed in fairness, she shrugged and said, "We all contribute to family, Naomi." So I asked the question that made her smile. I said, "You spent my grandparents' money and my own money on her and you never planned to tell me?" She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and laughed. Not of nerves, not of embarrassment. It was a slow, deliberate, cruel laugh. And then she said it. "Gold and dirt are not the same. Your sister is marrying into a world where appearances matter. That investment makes sense. You and Ethan are doing some tiny, tasteful thing. You don't need the same kind of help." For a second, the room went completely silent inside me, like my whole body had gone quiet. Then Sienna clapped, one sharp, satisfied clap, and said, "Mom is harsh, but she's not wrong." That was the moment something permanent in me cooled. I had spent my entire life waiting for an explosion that never came. I always imagined that if I were pushed far enough, I would finally scream, finally break down, finally give them the dramatic scene they seemed to want. But instead, I became very still. I looked at all three of them, my mother, my father, who had said nothing, my sister, who was already reaching for her champagne, and I realized none of them were expecting consequences. They were expecting pain, maybe tears, maybe an argument they could later twist into proof that I was the unstable, jealous one. What they did not expect was for me to become strategic. I stood up. My mother told me not to be dramatic. My father said we could discuss it later. Sienna rolled her eyes and asked if I was seriously going to ruin the mood over money. I picked up my bag, my keys, and my coat. I said nothing. I walked out while my mother was still calling after me. The second I got into my car, I did not cry. I opened my laptop. Because in their rush to build a luxury wedding they could not actually afford, my family had leaned on more of my professional access than they realized. I work in wedding and event operations. I know contracts, vendor timelines, deposit schedules, and contingency plans. When my mother had started calling me more often, not to ask how I was, but to pick my brain about vendors and agreements, I had helped. Old habits are hard to kill. Usefulness had been the closest thing to I got to approval. The venue rep they were using had agreed to a temporary hold because of my professional recommendation. The floral designer had approved a discount through a referral code tied to my company network. A transportation vendor had delayed full payment because I had personally vouched for this family. I sent 3 emails and made 2 calls before I even backed out of the driveway. all professional, all clean. I informed each vendor that I was withdrawing personal and professional sponsorship from any pending flexibility arrangements connected to the event. I was not financially responsible for any outstanding balances, and no one should rely on my name or reputation moving forward. I did not ask anyone to cancel anything. I simply removed the support structure they had built their fantasy on top of. Then I drove back to Charlotte through the night with my phone face down beside me. By the time I got home, there were 7 missed calls. By sunrise, there were over 70. 53 from my mother, 20 from Sienna, voicemails that moved from outrage to panic in less than 6 hours. The venue needed immediate confirmation, the florist was pausing production, transportation was suspended until payment cleared. For once in their lives, they were not calling me quietly to take something. They were calling because everything they had built by stepping on me was starting to shake. I listened to one voicemail from my mother, breathless, furious, and scared all at once. Then one from Sienna, sharp with panic under her usual attitude. "Don't do this to me. Don't ruin my wedding because you're bitter." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed one message and sent it to both of them. "Why are you begging a piece of dirt?" I turned my phone off and went to sleep. To understand why that one text sent my entire family into panic, you need to understand what they had been taking from me for years. Sienna and I were twins, but that was where the similarity ended. She was loud, charming, and dramatic in a way that made adults laugh instead of worry. She knew how to walk into a room and make it feel like an audience had just arrived for her. I was quieter. I liked plans, routines, and knowing exactly where things stood. My mother called me serious, like it was a character flaw. My father called me difficult whenever I asked why the rules were different for me. Sienna got away with messes because she was spirited. I got punished for the smallest mistakes because I should have known better. She needed softness. I was expected to survive without it. At birthday parties, she got the bigger cake because she liked attention more. At school events, my mother would miss my academic ceremonies, but somehow never missed a single one of Sienna's performances, even the mediocre ones. If relatives visited, they heard all about how beautiful and social Sienna was. Then my mother would gesture at me like a footnote and say, I was the smart one. That was the box they built for me early. Useful, but forgettable. Capable, but unloved. The older we got, the more they stopped trying to hide it. They bought her clothes because she cared about fashion. They gave her extra spending money because she had a social life to maintain. They let her cry her way out of consequences while telling me I was too cold when I refused to play along. I used to believe that if I achieved enough, if I behaved well enough, if I made their lives easier, eventually they would look at me the way they looked at her. But every success of mine only seemed to irritate them more. When I got the highest grades in school, my mother said I was making Sienna feel insecure. When I received a scholarship opportunity, my father told me to stop acting superior. When I worked weekends to buy my own laptop, my mother called me stingy for not sharing it more. Nothing I built was allowed to belong to me. If I succeeded, I was selfish. If I set limits, I was difficult. If I stayed quiet, they assumed I could handle even more neglect. The wedding fund was the one thing I had let myself believe might be different. My grandparents had started it when we were teenagers, a gift for both granddaughters, something equal, something practical for 2 futures not yet written. My grandmother had squeezed my hand and told me that no matter what happened later, this would be one thing no one could take from me. I held on to those words for years. I even added to the fund myself once I started working. Not a huge amount at first, but enough to matter, because every dollar represented hours of my effort. I contributed because I genuinely believed that one day, when I got married, something would have been saved for me too. It sounds naive now, but when you grow up half-loved, you become an expert at building hope out of scraps. You take the smallest sign of fairness and treat it like proof that maybe the story is not finished yet. That was my mistake. I thought the wedding fund meant there was one part of my life my family could not rewrite around Sienna. I had no idea they were already preparing to do exactly that. Meanwhile, I had built a real life. I worked my way through college with scholarships, internships, and jobs that taught me how to keep impossible schedules from falling apart. I moved to Charlotte after graduation. My apartment was not glamorous, but it was peaceful. My work was demanding, but it was real. I paid my bills, kept my promises, and learned that stability is a luxury when you have grown up inside emotional chaos. Sienna went the other direction. She reinvented herself every 6 months depending on what kind of attention seemed easiest to get. Boutique fitness, lifestyle blogging, social media brand deals, event hosting. None of it lasted long enough to become an actual career. But because she looked polished and knew how to flatter people, my parents kept treating her like she was on the brink of something great. Every time she failed, they called it potential. Every time I succeeded, they treated it like a personality defect. Then, Sienna announced she was engaged to Miles Holloway, a corporate attorney with expensive taste and the kind of family background my mother had been quietly chasing her whole life. Overnight, every conversation became about venues, menus, fittings, and social circles. My mother kept repeating that this wedding had to be perfect because it would open doors. I kept asking myself, open doors for whom? Not for Sienna, not even for the marriage. It was for my parents, for their image, for the fantasy they had always attached to my sister because she looked like the life they wanted others to think they lived. And so they spent the fund. They spent my grandparents' money. They spent the money I had contributed with my own hands. They planned to say nothing. They smiled at dinner and talked about imported flowers, and they never once planned to tell me. Until I asked. I met Ethan at a venue walkthrough after a storm had knocked out power during a rehearsal dinner. Everyone was panicking. He was one of the architects consulting on the restoration, and while the bride's family was spiraling, he was the only other person in the room calmer than I was. We ended up laughing in a dark hallway over emergency candles and ruined seating charts. He was thoughtful without being performative, kind without needing credit for it, and he listened in a way that made me feel like I wasn't competing with noise just to be heard. We dated for 2 years before talking seriously about marriage, and when we did, it felt nothing like the chaos I grew up around. We talked budget before flowers. We talked guest count before aesthetics. We talked about what mattered and what didn't. We wanted something intimate, elegant, and honest. No spectacle, no pretending. Just a room full of people who actually loved us. For the first time in my life, I could picture a wedding without dread attached to it. When I woke up the afternoon after driving home, I didn't feel guilty, even though my entire childhood had trained me to believe that withholding help from people who mistreated me was somehow more shameful than the way they had treated me. What I felt instead was something quieter and more unfamiliar, the deep relief of finally understanding that I didn't have to keep volunteering to be the bridge people burned while standing on it. My mother had shifted into victim mode. My father accused me of sabotaging Sienna out of envy. Sienna cycled through every version of herself in a single text thread, furious, then mocking, then pleading, then threatening to tell everyone I tried to destroy her wedding because I couldn't stand to see her happy. That last one almost made me laugh. People like Sienna always assume everyone else is driven by the same shallow hunger they are. It never occurred to her that I wasn't trying to steal her spotlight. I was simply done carrying the stage. I called Ethan instead of answering any of them. I told him everything, including the exact words my mother had used. He was quiet for a second or two, the kind of quiet that told me he was angrier than he wanted me to hear. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Did you do anything wrong?" I said no. He said, "Then let them deal with what they created." That was one of the reasons I loved him. He never confused peace with surrender. The wedding happened. My family managed to hold it together. Barely. My father liquidated part of an account he had no business touching that quickly. My mother borrowed money from 2 relatives she privately looked down on. Sienna cut certain extras, but only the ones guests would not notice in photographs. They kept the venue at a reduced package. They kept the dress. They kept the performance of wealth, just stripped of most of what had been holding it up. Several guests noticed that vendors seemed tense. One of my mother's friends overheard an argument about unpaid balances near the reception entrance. A cousin texted me that my absence was the real conversation of the evening. People found it strange that a twin sister was missing, and stranger still that no one could give the same explanation twice. Some were told I had a work emergency. Some were told I was sick. My favorite version, with my mother's fingerprints all over it, was that I had become too emotionally unstable to attend. Still, the photos my sister posted afterward looked glossy enough if you didn't know what had happened outside the frame. She smiled like she had won. Miles smiled like a man posing beside an expensive acquisition. My mother looked exhausted underneath professional makeup. My father looked older than I remembered. I looked at the pictures once and never went back. The strangest part was that I didn't feel consumed by any of it. Distance changed the texture of everything. My family had spent their lives building around image, and the moment I stepped away, I could see how fragile all of it really was. They needed me more than they would ever admit, not because they loved me, but because I was the practical backbone of a family addicted to appearances. Without me, they could still throw a party, they just couldn't do it cleanly. About 3 months after the wedding, a college friend messaged me after midnight. Sienna had been posting vague quotes about loneliness and fake love, and had been seen crying at a restaurant while Miles left early. I should have felt sympathy. Instead, what I felt was recognition. Miles had not fallen in love with my sister. He had selected her. She was polished enough for photographs, eager enough to be shaped, and shallow enough to mistake being displayed for being cherished. Status is not intimacy. Being chosen is not the same as being known. Once the wedding ended and the performance stopped feeling exciting, they were left with each other, and there wasn't much there. Around the same time, my father's financial situation began unraveling. He truly believed he could outmaneuver reality later, only later arrived faster than expected. Emergency borrowing turned into rolling balances turned into pressure turned into mistakes. My mother's boutique, limping along on local image rather than actual profit, started missing payments too. Friends she used to entertain stopped calling once there was no longer a polished table to sit at. My parents had spent so long curating the appearance of stability that they had no idea how to survive without applause. That was when the messages started again, through numbers I didn't recognize, through distant relatives, through an old neighbor's voicemail about how family is family no matter what. My mother wrote me a letter and mailed it to my office. Not my apartment, my office. She tried every version of the truth except the real one, that wedding stress caused words to be said wrong, that families make mistakes, that Sienna needed her twin. She did not write that she had called me dirt. She did not write that she spent money meant for me. I folded the letter and threw it away. A week later, Sienna called from a private number. I answered, not because I wanted to help, but because some part of me wanted to hear what her voice sounded like when life stopped clapping for her. She didn't bother with small talk. She said marriage was harder than she expected. Miles was always traveling, always working, always irritated, and lately making comments about her spending and her family's instability. Then she got to the real point. She asked if I still had contacts who could help my mother's boutique with an event partnership. When I stayed silent, she pushed further and asked if Ethan knew any investors. I almost admired the nerve. Even in the middle of her own unraveling, she still saw me as a utility, not a sister, not a person she had humiliated, a tool she hoped had not yet learned its worth. I told her no. She turned sharp immediately, accused me of enjoying their suffering, of waiting for them to fall apart so I could feel superior. That was when I finally said something that had been true for years. I don't need you to suffer to know who I am. I just needed to stop letting you decide it. She hung up. Not long after, I heard my parents were quietly preparing to sell the house and move somewhere much smaller. The same house where I had spent years being told to give more, adjust more, understand more. It was now one more thing they could no longer afford to keep. Ethan found me sitting in our kitchen the night I heard that, staring at nothing. He said something I have never forgotten. Some people would rather lose everything than admit they were wrong to the one person they treated the worst. He was right. My family was not collapsing because I had left. They were collapsing because every major choice they had made was designed to preserve a lie. The final time they reached out was almost 8 months after that dinner. By then, Ethan and I had nearly finished planning our wedding, our guest list so intentional that every name on it made me feel calm instead of obligated. One evening, just as I was leaving work, my phone rang with a video call from an unknown number. My mother's face filled the screen, older and thinner than I remembered, her makeup gone, her posture collapsed in a way I had never seen. My father was beside her, looking as though pride had finally become too heavy to carry. And behind them, on the edge of a sofa in what was clearly not their old house, sat Sienna, silent. No perfect hair, no smugness, no applause left in her. My mother started crying. Real crying, not the theatrical kind she used to produce when she wanted sympathy. She told me they had made terrible mistakes. They had lost the house, Sienna and Miles were separating, my father's career was damaged. Then she said the words I had waited my whole life to hear and no longer needed. We were wrong. I asked quietly, "Wrong about what?" She closed her eyes. Then, "Wrong about you. Wrong about your worth. Wrong about the way we treated you. Wrong about choosing appearances over fairness." My father said he should have stopped it years ago, that he had told himself he was keeping the peace when really he had been protecting the wrong child and sacrificing the right one. I believed he meant it, and somehow that made it sadder, because truth arriving late does not restore the years it stole. Then my mother said what she had really called for. She asked if we could start over. She asked if I could help the family heal. She didn't ask for money directly, but the shape of the request was the same as it had always been. Come back, stabilize us, make this easier to survive. I looked at all of them and felt something I hadn't expected. Not hatred, not vindication. Clarity. The kind that comes when grief has finished turning into wisdom. I told them I was getting married soon. It would be small, peaceful, and filled with people who had never made me earn basic dignity. My mother asked through tears if there was still a chance they could be part of it. Sienna finally looked up, and for the first time in my life, she looked small, not because life had humbled her into goodness, but because it had stripped away the audience she used to mistake for love. I took a breath and gave them the truth they spent years avoiding. You taught me exactly what I was to this family when you took what was mine, laughed in my face, and expected me to stay. I believed you. I built my life around that lesson. Now you have to live with it too. My mother whispered, "Please." Sienna opened her mouth, then closed it. My father stared at me with the look of a man seeing the final bill for a debt he had ignored too long. I told them I did not wish ruin on any of them. I hoped they learned how to treat people before they needed something from them. I hoped Sienna one day understood that being favored is not the same as being loved, and that being shielded from consequences can leave a person weak in all the ways that truly matter. Then I said I was not coming back. I ended the call before they could answer. A month later, I married Ethan beside a quiet lake under strings of warm lights and old trees that didn't need decoration to feel beautiful. There was no spectacle, no false luxury, no desperate need to impress anyone, just vows, laughter, and people who had shown up early because they wanted to help. When I walked towards him, I did not think about what my family had taken from me. I thought about what they had failed to destroy.
my peace, my judgment, my ability to love without humiliating someone first. That, more than anything, was the ending they never expected me to have. If there is any lesson in all of this, it is that favoritism poisons everyone it touches. It damages the child who is neglected, but it also hollows out the child who is worshipped, teaching them that love can be replaced by indulgence and value comes from display instead of character. It teaches parents to confuse control with care and image with success until they wake up surrounded by the wreckage of their own choices.
through a delivery service. I contributed to a college fund that Rachel helped structure, so their parents could not touch it. I paid directly for a few therapy sessions when the children's school counselor recommended support. But I did not babysit. I did not pick up. I did not become the emergency plan. The adults who created those children were finally required to arrange care, pay invoices, adjust schedules, and live with the cost of their own choices. Vanessa gave birth in late summer. There was no big party, no pastel fundraiser, no church speech about villages. The baby announcement got polite likes and very few comments. Brandon was working temporary shifts at a warehouse after the dealership let him go permanently. The SUV he loved disappeared from their driveway first, then the backyard furniture, then the weekly restaurant photos. Vanessa went back to selling handmade baby blankets online, but the tone changed. She no longer posted captions about being blessed with a village. She posted discount codes. My mother and father aged quickly that year. Without the church roll and HOA status, they had fewer places to perform authority. They still helped Vanessa, but now they understood what they had tried to force on me. School pickups, sick days, tantrums, bills, doctor appointments, laundry that never ended. My mother called once from a blocked number and said, "Natalie, I need to say something." I almost hung up, but I waited. She breathed unevenly. "I did not know how much you were carrying." I looked down at my desk where my calendar held meetings I had chosen and evenings that belonged to me. "Yes, you did," I said gently. "You just thought I would keep carrying it." She cried. Then she asked if I could come home for a weekend because Vanessa was overwhelmed. I said no. Then I offered to pay directly for one session with a child care planning counselor who could help them build a real schedule. My mother said, "That is not the same as family helping." I said, "It is exactly family helping. It is just not family sacrificing one person anymore." That was the last full conversation we had. A week later, Vanessa emailed me one sentence. "You made everyone hate us." I replied with one sentence back. "No, I gave everyone the information they needed to stop blaming me." She did not answer. I was sitting on my balcony that evening when rain started falling over Raleigh. Soft and silver under the streetlights, my phone was face down on the table. For once, I did not feel afraid of what might be waiting on the screen. I thought about that cookout, the way they had laughed when they told me my life was training for someone else's. I thought about the community center, the hospital lobby, the church projector, the mediation table. I thought about how many times I had confused being needed with being loved. The hardest lesson was not learning to say no. It was surviving the anger of people who benefited from my yeses. Family should be a place where love is shared, not a system where one person is drained so everyone else can stay comfortable. Children deserve responsible parents, honest plans, and safe adults, not chaos disguised as tradition. Helping is meaningful when it is chosen freely. When it is demanded, manipulated, or forced through guilt, it stops being love and becomes control. My story taught me that boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are education. They teach others where respect begins, and they teach us that our peace has value. You can love people and still refuse to be used by them. You can care about children and still know they are not your responsibility to raise. You can walk away from a family pattern and still become a better person because of it. That night, I turned my phone off, listened to the rain, and smiled. For the first time in my life, no one was waiting for me to rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. And for the first time, I did not mistake that silence for loneliness. I recognized it for what it was: freedom.